So we had quite a few big stories come out this week, but I've been thinking about this for a few days, and I want to try to see everything in its totality. So a little disclaimer before we start. I'm going to have to play devil's advocate a little bit, try to see things from all sides. From the US establishment perspective, China's perspective, and the perspective from, the global oligarchy. For lack of a better term, we're going to call it a thought experiment. But I'm betting on the fact that most of you watch my videos from time to time, so in general, you kinda know what I think about these topics. Even so, I'll try to make it clear when I'm putting myself in the shoes of the establishment. Anyway, a couple weeks ago, we talked about how the truth has more endurance than the narrative. In the short term, narratives can and will carry a political agenda pretty far, but in the end, whenever that point is, the truth comes to light. I guess one problem we have though, and I hope I'm wrong, but there's not enough people who actually care about the truth. They have successfully turned everything into a political game, tribe above everything. At least, that's the way it seems. Now, one reason I say that is because, in general, I find it really hard to believe that so many people seemingly believe these establishment narratives. And it's going to be interesting to see how everyone goes into damage control over the tapes of January 6th. Things that we knew years and years ago. Anyway, the list of narratives that apply to this, things that are patently absurd but the masses just accept, well, it's a pretty long list. So what is a good example? Well, of course, COVID. You could approach this from a myriad of angles, but I want to stick to the recent 180 that the government is doing on the lab leak theory. Now, if you followed the funding from the NIH, the EcoHealth and Peter Daszak story, and even the changes made during the Obama presidency regarding gain-of-function research, well, if you followed those stories, then you knew that this was the most likely scenario. And we talked about it recently. The original gain-of-function controversy was in fact bird flu. In 2012, they paused the controversial research, and curious timing, in 2017, the NIH started accepting new funding proposals for this type of research. They even expanded beyond the bird flu and into other pathogenic research areas. And yes, we all know where this led. Just follow the money, that's all you had to do. You didn't even have to get caught up in the surrounding drama. If you follow the cash, then you'll find a direct line from the US to that particular lab in China. And I'm pretty sure everyone knew this. How could you not, unless you were purposely trying to ignore it? However, it was being put into the public consciousness mainly by independent or right-leaning individuals. And then, of course, the media, the entire machine, had to take the opposition side, no matter what. Yes, partisan hacks had no choice as political tribalism, in their eyes, became more important than the truth. Yes, I really do believe that their minds broke in 2016. Objectivity gave way to ideology real fast. Well, I guess you could say that objectivity has been on a steady decline for quite a while. But let's continue with the list of possibilities by looking at it from the perspective that it was actually a true accident. And then, of course, we'll get into the more sinister options on the table. So, with that being said, if in fact it was an accident, then that would be entirely embarrassing for the US government, as it did have catastrophic consequences for the entire world. Naturally, the US government couldn't just come out and say, yeah, sorry, our bad. We really shouldn't have trusted the Chinese government and their shoddy labs to carry out dangerous, pathogenic research. And the main reason why they couldn't come out and say that is because, well, this is pretty much the standard. And to that end, the media, being the mockingbirds that they are, got in line, pretty quick. Some of them did this out of the partisan hack angle that we talked about. Others did it because they understood that they had to walk a certain line. The higher-ups at the media companies, the main figureheads in the media too, they all cannot be that stupid. They knew the truth, but I think a lot of them, well, they just believe that you don't F with the establishment. But the thing is that this accident theory doesn't address some of the more downright tyrannical aspects to this. How is it that everyone within legacy media, the US government, multinational corporations, the banking system, and big tech all immediately jump right to their most fascistic tendencies? They had systems ready to be rolled out, policies written, and it all revolved around censoring dissent, setting up a digital ID infrastructure, and combining the consequences of a pandemic with the climate proposals. Yes, they were trying to use it as a vehicle for their broader agenda. Now, could that all be a never let a good crisis go to waste type of situation? I personally don't think so, but who cares what I think? What do you think about that? If you look at everything that went on in the timeline of events, well, perhaps we should start to consider some of the other possibilities. So when thinking about this, the next domino to fall, well, could the next quote-unquote conspiracy theory to be proven to be an actual conspiracy be surrounding intent? Was this intentionally released? So I was thinking about this, and there's actually a couple separate possibilities linked to the question surrounding intent. So, alright, let's try to look at it from China's perspective, and just try to see if it would make any geopolitical sense to intentionally release it themselves. And so, in this regard, we have talked about the timeline before. But as far as I know, the first big event, the event that led to international spread, was the Wuhan military games. And as it turns out, a government report came out in 2021 indicating that this was, in fact, one of the earliest super spreader events, end of quote. Anyway, we'll get to the other weird coincidence related to the timing of everything in a bit, because there is more to this than meets the eye. Anyway, the thing gets released. Global entities arrive in Wuhan for the military games, and China decided it would be a good idea to close off domestic flights, but allow international flights to leave, which of course, naturally, led to international spread. So we have to ask ourselves, was this a part of a broader World War III plan? You know, the long game. Weaken the West through a pandemic, destabilize the world, and prepare to invade Taiwan around 2025. And actually, a lot of people believe that this is the reason for the change in narrative happening right now. They say that this will be used by the US as justification for the war. They'll say China released it on purpose, killing millions of people, and we cannot let that slide. At the very least, something like that.
Just the last few minutes, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin putting out a brand new warning on China. It's a letter to the force, meaning all of the troops serving under our flag. And he makes it clear that China is the military's top priority. Quote, an increasingly aggressive China is trying to reshape the international rules-based system to suit its authoritarian preferences. This is a generational challenge, and the department will rise to meet it.
And I believe it. I could definitely see that happening. And because it would also act as cover. This narrative combined with the global war breaking out, while those combined might obfuscate the fact that we were the ones actually funding the research. However, I suppose that brings us to the other possibilities. Was it a never let a good crisis go to waste? Now for this, we have to assume that the end of the current economic order was on the horizon. The writing was on the wall ever since the 2008 collapse. Since then, we have just been in this, managed decline, awaiting the opportunity to jump ship, recalibrate, and reestablish a quote-unquote new world order. Suddenly, a pandemic breaks out, the opportunity arises, and they latch onto it to push this transition into a new economic set. What a perfect coincidence. And well, of course, when you build a new economic order, war is almost inevitable. And so, because of this, the US, our allies, Russia, China, the Middle East, everyone now knows that World War III must happen. It's almost written in stone. And the reason being is because as the current economic order collapses, a power vacuum emerges. And basically, everyone believes that they have to grab as much shit as possible before the next economic order is set in stone. So basically the idea is that they all have to position themselves in some strategic manner for their nation to benefit from this new economic system. However, with the emerging BRIC financial system versus the West's digital dollar solution, well, war becomes inevitable. You know, what they see as just an unfortunate reality. At least, that's the thinking we're going to go with for this thought experiment, I guess. But yeah, in this scenario, they all knew that World War III was inevitable. So it doesn't really matter that China kicked it off. Every single nation just used it as a vehicle for their own national interest. Just awaiting for the war to break out, which it has. Most just don't know it yet. However, that brings us to the final possibility being brought forth to be discussed. It's all intentional. As you know, I like to talk about this aspect quite a bit, and you've heard me talk about the origins of the World Economic Forum, the Limits to Growth Report, and all of that stuff. So we're going to skip some of the finer details, but in 1972, the Club of Rome came out with the Limits to Growth Report, which they quote-unquote predicted that society would begin to collapse by 2030. And the reason being, well, they claim that it's due to the discrepancy between resource scarcity and population growth. So, we should probably ask ourselves, were they just incredibly accurate with their timeline prediction for the breakdown of society? Or on the other hand, was it engineered to fit their transition plan? I mean, come on, based on everything they get wrong with their prediction models, I don't really think we're going out on a limb to suggest that it's pretty far-fetched to believe that this one time, miraculously, this prediction is the one time they nailed it. So, yeah, besides that, they openly talk about their blueprint for changing the world, and are following it to a T. However, to me, the real insidious aspect is the psychological manipulation that goes into this, something they are also pretty open about. It seems like they really believe this old, I don't even know what you would call it, a proverb of sorts. And I quote, "Civilizations need a myth to live," end of quote. So as a follow-up to The Limits to Growth, the Club of Rome came out with a book entitled The Final Global Revolution. This was written by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, and on the back of the book it talks about the Club of Rome, and I quote, "Alexander King, one of Britain's most respected scientists, is a founding member of the Club of Rome, which includes among its members many public figures, business and industrial leaders, scientists, heads of state. Bertrand Schneider, the Club of Rome's Secretary General, is also a fellow at the World Academy of Art and Science." So yeah, these dudes are certified Illuminati, alright? I'm just kidding, by the way, don't get hung up on that. Well, I'm half kidding, okay? I'm half kidding. Anyway, my point is that in this book they lay out the plan to enable this agenda to move forward. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy then is humanity itself, end of quote. So, remember my point about how civilizations need a myth to live? Well, yeah, I guess they took that one real serious. Now, okay, so to understand how this all plays a role, well, the World Economic Forum began as the brainchild of the Council on Foreign Relations and Henry Kissinger. You see, Henry Kissinger was Klaus Schwab's mentor, and they met at Harvard. The first World Economic Forum meeting was back in 1971. However, it was the third meeting that really set everything in motion. Yes, the mainline speaker for that event was a man named Aurelio Pesci, another depopulationist who was also a founding member of the Club of Rome. And I quote from the World Economic Forum website, 1973, a prescient warning on the environment. So two developments distinguished the third Davos meeting. First, Aurelio Pesci, the Italian industrialist, delivered a speech on his book, The Limits to Growth, which had caused a sensation by calling into question the sustainability of global economic growth. The authors outlined the choices that society had to make to reconcile economic development and environmental constraints. And then, Klaus Schwab goes on to talk about the Davos Manifesto, which also originated from that meeting in 1973. And he talks about how they're going to update their Davos Manifesto for the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum. And yes, Klaus.
No one gives a shit.
And well, they shouldn't give a shit because every book this guy puts out is basically the mad ravings of a lunatic. But anyway, let's move on. The main point here is that the World Economic Forum and the Club of Rome are inextricably linked. They have been working at this 2030 plan since the 1970s, and those two entities, the World Economic Forum and the Club of Rome, well, they hold the same views on humanity. And yeah, it's not gonna look good for us. I mean, yeah, they're working towards the same future. You see, the limits to growth set us on the path towards Agenda 21, which of course, as we know, Nancy Pelosi helped sign us on to that agreement back in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio. However, from there, Agenda 21 quickly became what is commonly known as Agenda 2030. And yeah, so these are basically just the Sustainable Development Goals from the World Economic Forum, the UN, and yeah, it's pretty much the basis for all the chaos we see today. From the Ukraine-Russia war to the global economic destabilization, the civil unrest, and yes, the rise of authoritarian governments as well. But that's not all. Yes, they can also be attributed to the rise of authoritarian thinking just within the masses. And the reason being is because they have instilled these core tenets to their ideology throughout public education. As they said, they sought a new enemy, and the enemy is humanity. I mean, come on, they openly talk about it. Okay, so one more point on this before we get back from this tangent. Environmentalism is not the problem. I don't know one person that does not want to solve pollution, protect rainforests, clean up the oceans, figure out a way to stop microplastics from pretty much destroying everything. We're all for that. But the problem is that they're using those to manipulate people, using that sentiment. Yes, I do believe. The most significant danger to our world is the power-mad sociopaths who will subjugate the world to their will. And they're going to do it all for their new economic order. Now, to any who actually do believe the narrative, I don't know what to tell you. Carbon markets and social credit scores are not going to change the climate. It's just a ruse to control you. Back when we were talking about the origins of the World Economic Forum and transhumanism, well, I came across a quote from a man named Arnold Toynbee. And if you don't know, this guy has ties to the origins of the modern transhumanist depopulationist agenda. He has ties to guys like Cecil Rhodes and the Tavistock Institute, I believe. He's even connected to guys like Alfred Milner and the Round Table groups. Anyway, he said, and I quote, "The cult of sovereignty has become mankind's major religion. Its God demands human sacrifice," end of quote. Now, I think that's an interesting quote because, as I interpret it, well, it's a great example of their smug disdain. And it shows collectively how all of these people think. Because this idea that sovereignty is something to decry, that sovereignty, either on a national level or an individual level, that sovereignty is somehow hindering human progress. I mean, it's crazy. They all have this weird collectivist worldview. Yes, they seem to believe that a centralized global authority would solve all of humanity's problems. So once again, in the quote, he mentions that sovereignty has become mankind's major religion, and its God demands sacrifice. You know, it's also pretty interesting because the core point to their entire philosophy is that human sacrifice is not only needed, but obliged for their utopian view. I mean, come on, they openly talk about how they need less people on the planet.
So in the session we just attended here at the Economic Forum, I think there was a sense of relief, actually, in your frankness. You brought up some issues that others are reluctant to bring up.
Always. All the religious groups are against me because I'm talking about population. They want more souls. I want less on the planet.
So that's what I hope for. That we can, I mean, the planet can support something like 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion, depending on how much liberty and how much material consumption you want to have. If you want more liberty and more consumption, you have to have fewer people. And conversely, you can have more people. I mean, we could even have 8 or 9 billion probably if we have a very strong dictatorship, which is smart.
And the idea that global government would stop conflict is pretty damn funny. I mean, of course, to strip the world of autonomy and force a belief system, what could go wrong? Well, that's going to lead to a hell of a lot more conflict. And most certainly, these monstrous ideologues would deem it to be a much-needed sacrifice. A sacrifice whose toll would be paid by extinguishing human life. Yes, they would say it's all for the greater good. And actually, we are seeing this happen right now as they send hundreds of thousands of people to their death in Ukraine. But you know, don't worry about it because, as they say, it's a part of the bigger picture. Anyway, at the recent 2023 World Government Summit, despite what you may think of Elon Musk, no matter what side of the drama you reside on, as for me, I am decidedly undecided on him. But I do think we should give him some credit for telling everyone that world government is a terrible, terrible idea. And he did so at the World Government Summit. So yeah, that takes some balls, don't you think?
One thing I should say, and I know this is called the World Government Summit, but I think we should be maybe a little bit concerned about actually becoming too much of a single world government. If I may say, that we want to avoid creating a civilizational risk by having, frankly, this may sound a little odd, too much cooperation between governments. If you look at, say, at history and the rise and fall of civilizations, that really all throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen, but it hasn't meant the doom of humanity as a whole, because there've been all these separate civilizations that were separated by great distances. And so, say like while Rome was falling, Islam was rising, and so you had like the sort of caliphate doing incredibly well while Rome was doing terribly. And that actually ended up being a source of preservation of knowledge and many scientific advancements. And so I think we want to be a little bit cautious about being too much of a single civilization, because if we are too much of a single civilization, then if the whole thing may collapse. I'm obviously not suggesting war or anything like that, but I think we want to be a little bit wary of actually cooperating too much. It sounds a little odd, but we want to have some amount of civilizational diversity such that if something does go wrong with some part of civilization, that the whole thing doesn't collapse, and humanity keeps moving forward.
And yes, I do think he's right on that. Global government would destabilize the world to complete civilization collapse. Anyway, I say all that because my original point, if you can remember it, was asking if this was intentional. to create the conditions needed for this massive global change. Well, as we know, something odd was happening at the same time as the Wuhan military games. So, coincidentally, on October 18th, Event 201 happened in New York City, which simulated a response to a coronavirus outbreak. What are the odds of that? But get this was also occurring at the same time as the Wuhan military games. Crazy. What are the odds? I don't know. I have no idea. But I bet the odds are not good. Now, if you really wanted to give the establishment the benefit of the doubt for some reason, one could say that people in the know could have gotten the heads up that China was about to release a pathogen. Well, shit, we have to start beefing up our response times, start to get ready. Intel is saying that China is going to release this thing. You know, something like that. And I don't know, yeah, I guess that would make sense, but do I believe it? No, I do not. And the reason why I don't believe that is because of this. Just as we went over the timing before, there's a great article written by Tim Hinchliffe. Let's read a section of this just to try to go over the timeline. And I quote, "Between 2014 and 2017, the World Economic Forum called to reshape, restart, reboot, and reset the global order every single year. In 2014, they came out with a paper entitled The Reshaping of the World, Consequences for Society, Politics, and Business. In 2015, they released this, and I quote, We need to press restart on the global economy. In 2016, How to Reboot the Global Economy. And then in 2017, Our World Needs a Reset on How We Operate. So after 2017, things become even more precarious. And yes, that's because in 2018, the Davos elites turned their heads towards simulating fake pandemic scenarios to see how prepared the world would be in the face of a different crisis. So on May 15, 2018, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security hosted the CLADEX pandemic exercise in partnership with the World Economic Forum. The CLADEX event also included discussion panels with real policymakers who assessed that governments and industry were not adequately prepared for a fictitious global pandemic. And I quote, In the end, the outcome was tragic. The most catastrophic pandemic in history with hundreds of millions of deaths, economic collapse, and societal upheaval. And then from there, on October 18, 2019, in partnership with Johns Hopkins and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum ran Event 201. Now, the crazy part of this one is that the simulation was so similar to the real event that Johns Hopkins actually had to come out with a statement saying that Event 201 was not meant to predict the future. So, yeah, I don't know. We will definitely find out the truth eventually. It's just a matter of when. But now, I want to ask one question. Why in the hell would the US government go along with this? Why go along with a plan that clearly states the main idea is to dethrone the US as a global superpower? What's the real purpose behind establishing this quote-unquote New World Order, this new economic system? I mean, doesn't it seem counterintuitive to the US establishment? But then again, I don't think I'm taking into account the true scope of this technocratic system. And you know, it's kind of hard for me to articulate my thoughts on this because the problems are so vast and they all kind of connect. I mean, we do already know that the establishment operates as if it's a world government system already. They do not believe in the US as a nation. They believe in their global power. You know, the global power that has accumulated since World War II. The global power that we have enforced through military might. Just look at their priorities: Ohio or Ukraine, war or domestic issues. And well, we all know what they chose. Anyway, okay, so let's try to look at it from the economic side for a second and try to see it from a traditional US establishment perspective mixed with the fanatic technocratic perspective. Now, okay, a little warning, this is where I have to play some heavy devil's advocate, just so I can try to see it from this viewpoint. So once again for this, we are going to have to assume that the 2008 financial collapse really was the beginning of the end of the current economic order, and that we have been in this weird, managed decline ever since. And if this was the case, well then the US establishment knows that they have to compete with Russia and China in order to get this set up. If they F it up, emergency services, infrastructure, well, it can't be maintained. The entire world would devolve into complete chaos rather quickly. And so, if you are so inclined to give the establishment the benefit of the doubt, well then you might assume that they have to balance the reality against the narrative and against the prospect of all-out war. All for the economic control of this new global order. And yeah, so everyone pretty much agrees that the petrodollar was a pretty shit idea. Although it was profitable, in the long term, it ain't gonna work. And so we already got off the gold standard, and they don't really want the masses to hold any real value. After all, they're sociopaths with control issues. They want to control you. Suddenly, crypto makes an appearance. Ah yes, the central bank digital currency concept is beginning to come to light. Now okay, so with our current economic understanding, if you really want to control people, what could they possibly base an economic system on? Well, they do know that basing a currency on a natural resource worked out pretty well. And we are all carbon-based beings. And so, is it a leap for me to think, if you want to control carbon-based beings, control their movement, restrict their freedom, and control economic output, well damn, they just figured, let's put a price tag on carbon emissions, and then charge the carbon beings for the sole reason that they exist. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. A perfect system for tyrants. As the Bank of International Settlements have said, this central bank digital currency tied to carbon markets allows for unprecedented control and surveillance over the entire global economy. Yes, they say that they can pinpoint every single transaction on Earth. However, their agenda is more widespread than just economics. And you know, now that I'm thinking about it, they would have had a way better opportunity to actually change the global economy. You know, if they didn't go full tyrant. But I guess they just couldn't help themselves. I mean, everybody has to know the limits on your individual freedoms, your ability to travel, the constant surveillance, facial recognition, digital IDs, and smart cities. Well, it's all coming together to form the most oppressive and expansive authoritarian regime in history. The entire globe is supposed to be connected to this technocratic system. And that ecosystem, the Internet of Things, every single physical object connected to this technocratic system, well, is going to interface with the Internet of Bodies. It's going to interface with us.
The Internet of Bodies, or IOB, is actually an ecosystem. It's a bunch of devices that are connected to the Internet that contain software and that either collect personal health data about you or can alter the body's function. We think of the Internet of Bodies as this collection of all these devices as well as all the data that the devices are gathering about you. And in healthcare, it's Internet of Bodies has been around for quite a while.
So the Internet of Bodies, imagine the power of AI. What is artificial intelligence? It's a way to automate computation and cognition. So we can now automate learning, perceiving, doing computation. It's a pervasive general purpose technology that will be used in all of our industries, that will come into our professional networks, our private networks, our schools, our industries and our offices. What I wanted to epitomize with the Internet of Bodies is this notion that we will be under assessment, we will be under measure of computation in every aspect of our lives in the future. From what you eat, who you date, what you buy on the internet, how much energy you use, but also what are your vital signs? How well are you doing in terms of health? What kind of specific genetic quirks do you have? What's your genome telling about your health, about your mental health, about how well you are doing, how well you are aging, what kind of disease you are susceptible to?
It has a bit of an Orwellian twinge to it.
Well,
and this, as a whole, the Internet of Bodies and the Internet of Things, is going to comprise what is called the Internet of Everything. Now, just real quick, I want to talk about this technocratic and transhuman perspective. Their new economic system is directly tied to this idea of transhumanism. As we just discussed, the Internet of Everything includes the Internet of Bodies. It includes us. Anyway, over time, the goals of transhumanism grew even more ambitious and grandiose, no longer satisfied with merely attaining extraordinary capabilities. Yes, this movement shifted its primary focus to fulfilling the old age dream of immortality. Yes, they gave new meaning to St. Paul's triumphant declaration, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" So yeah, basically transhumanists believe that as technology grows increasingly sophisticated, particularly within research areas like AI, a moment called the quote-unquote singularity will come. Now they believe that this cascade of technological advances will become self-generating, unstoppable, and uncontrollable. This crescendo of scientific leaps will culminate in everlasting life via our ability to upload our minds into computers. Now, once safely in cyberspace, transhumans can live indefinitely, perhaps melding their own cyber minds with others, being downloaded into a cyborg, their own cryogenically frozen heads attached to new bodies, or perhaps into their own clones. Now, the details can become a bit murky, but Ray Kurzweil, the guy who wrote about the singularity, believes that software heaven will be with us by the 2040s. And this is actually where their desperation becomes most clearly visible. You see, transhumanism is overwhelmingly tied to materialism. Poll data shows that most of the movement's adherents are atheists. And with a scattering of agnostics and apostate religionists thrown in. In any event, the focus of their movement is materialistic. Most of them believe or fear that nothing of them will survive their own death. And really, that kind of thinking leads to nihilism, or at the very least, a temptation to despair. Something must be done, and so enter transhumanism. As one of the movement's proselytizers, Zoltan Istvan, who ran for president in 2016, has said, and I quote, "I am an atheist, therefore I am a transhumanist." So he goes on to say, and I quote, "The challenging idea that everyone in the 21st century must decide how far they are willing to go to use technology and science to improve their lives is loudly calling, and the faithless will answer it. It is inevitable that hundreds and hundreds of millions will soon call themselves transhumanists, if not in name, then in spirit. Many will end up supporting indefinite life extension and technology that strips away our humanness and promotes our transhumanness. Further into the future, many more will begin to discard the human body in favor of embracing synthetic forms of being." End of quote. Well, damn. However, the main point I want to get to is the fact that nihilistic thinking is evident throughout every Davos event. It's evident throughout all of Yuval Harari's quotes. It's all based on the premise that human life, consciousness, the human body, our very DNA is immaterial, a coincidence of electrical signals, a chance phenomena, and one that should be discarded, dismissed, and transcended to rise to a more superior existence. And I would bet that while they're in pursuit of this goal, your life, your thoughts, your very existence, well, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to them. However, let's move on to something else. What is the reason behind this authoritarian thinking? What's the reason behind why they want to have this much control over everyone, running over long-held beliefs on individual freedom? Now, personally, I think there is a more sinister reason for this, but once again, I have to play devil's advocate. Yes, we're going to have to suspend our disbelief for a moment and give the US establishment the benefit of the doubt, so just bear with me. However, things do get pretty interesting from here. So we've talked a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, how AI and robotics is going to change what it actually means to work. So it is estimated that automation is projected to destroy up to 70% of jobs by 2050. So just a thought. Our government is funded by our taxes. So if job markets and the global economy in general collapses, well, the government is not going to be able to fund itself. And what's the answer to this? Well, here comes fascism. Yes, the public-private partnerships, the merging of government and corporation. Now, one example of this is the chip manufacturing plan that the US establishment has just, quote-unquote, worked out. It is considered to be a public-private partnership. If a tech company wants in on the $40 billion of investment to manufacture these chips here rather than in China or Taiwan, well, if you want a piece of that $40 billion bucks, then you have to comply with certain government initiatives. Yeah, they have things in there like union wages for contractors, you gotta meet climate change goals, etc. But the main sticking point is if they want that investment money, then they have to cut the government in on the profits. Yeah, public-private partnerships, corporatism. And if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, could the reason for this rise of corporatism, fascism, well, could one of the main reasons be the impending collapse of job markets? No taxes come in, and well, you gotta get that money somewhere. So they merge with corporations and siphon off government funding from profit margins. I don't know, but this is the plan for every industry. And on the individual level, they are just going to fine you into oblivion for simply existing, as we are seeing in the UK. They are kind of acting like a test site for their city control systems, but we'll get to that in a second. But we do have to ask, why all the social control? Why seek to control the entire population, surveil and monitor every move they make, where they go, who they talk to, what media they engage with online, even to the point of monitoring biometric data 24/7? And of course, there are plans to monitor your very thoughts, or plans for pre-crime tech. What is the reason? I don't know, but if you're trying, really trying to give these tyrants the benefit of the doubt, well then I guess you could say it's in an effort to counter the system collapse and stop everyone from going full Mad Max. Or is it even more sinister than that? I believe it is. And I kind of feel like we're all living through some weird global Stockholm syndrome. Well, we aren't, but there's a lot of people who are. Now, what's the main trick they want to employ? Well, as I said, it's sort of as if they are actually trying to induce this kind of Stockholm syndrome in the masses. They are trying to get you to voluntarily sign up for surveillance, as if it was all your idea to begin with. I guess the trick to subjugation is to get people to love their subjugation.
Brave New World, with another parable which was put forth more recently in George Orwell's book 1984. I'm inclined to think that the scientific dictatorships of the future, and I think there are going to be scientific dictatorships in many parts of the world, will be probably a good deal nearer to the Brave New World pattern than to the 1984 pattern. They will be a good deal nearer, not because of any humanitarian qualms in the scientific dictators, but simply because the Brave New World pattern is probably a good deal more efficient than the other. But if you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, the state of servitude, the state of being, well, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. People can be made to enjoy a state of affairs which, by any decent standard, they ought not to enjoy. And these methods, I think, are a real refinement on the older methods of terror, because they combine methods of terror with methods of acceptance. But then there are various other methods which one can think of. There is, for example, the pharmacological method. This was one of the things I talked about in Brave New World. And the result would be that, I mean, you can imagine a euphoric which would make people thoroughly happy even in the most abominable circumstances. I mean, these things are possible.
Now, there is a lot to take in from that clip of Aldous Huxley. And I quote, "There will be in the next generation or so a pharmacological method to making people love their servitude and producing a dictatorship without tears, so to speak, producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing, or even brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution," end of quote. Now, if you pay attention to what global leaders, think tanks, or any of the speeches that take place at Davos, well, then you will quickly see that this is pretty much their pitch for everything. Can they convince people to love their own slavery? The clip of Aldous Huxley is rather, well, it's striking, a prophetic assessment of where society was headed. And this seems to be the exact end goal that we are set to endure. Manipulating you into loving your own servitude, convincing the world to voluntarily embrace the concept for concentration camps for entire societies. Welcome to the 15-minute city. Welcome to the 15-minute city, where technological innovation meets tyrannical ambition. So in this regard, we have a few clips to watch, a 15-minute city, mega city type of deal planned for here in the US. But first, let's take a look at the new one being proposed in the Middle East.
The new horizon for Riyadh. This is the new Maraba, the world's largest modern downtown. Born from a nation's vision to create a new way of living, a place designed around people. Inspired by our culture, closer to nature, work and play. With 80 state-of-the-art entertainment venues. A new home for hundreds of thousands of residents. A new university for global students. And hotels welcoming millions of new visitors. Creating jobs. And contributing to the GDP. And at its heart, a new icon, the macabre, the world's first immersive experiential destination, helping to make Riyadh one of the top 10 most livable cities in the world. This is the new face of Riyadh. Experience a new horizon. New Murabba.
The Macabre will be the world's first immersive experiential destination, where you enter a new reality, transported to Mars one day and magical worlds the next. A gateway to another world. So, okay. Enter a new reality, a gateway to another world. Now, I don't know, but when either fanatics or those who engage over at Bohemian Grove start talking about gateways to another world, well, I start to get an ominous feeling. I will not be going to any gateways proposed by them. However, as we talk about pretty much constantly, this is a global plan, so let's check out what's going on in the US. A 15-minute city concept that will encompass an area akin to a megacity. And yes, we have here Tolosa. It's going to encompass 36 districts across a swath of Nevada, Arizona, and Utah.
But what about Tolosa? It's yet another futuristic city planned to be built from scratch. This time it'll be set somewhere in the middle of a US desert and cost a staggering $400 billion to complete. Tolosa's blueprints is all about sustainability and an economic system called equitism. And it's been proposed by this guy, billionaire entrepreneur Mark Lorry, a former Walmart executive and founder of Jet.com and Diapers.com. Yep, you heard that right.
So I thought, well, what if we created a Tolosa Community Foundation and we went out and acquired hundreds of thousands of acres of worthless land and were able to build a city.
The city's being designed by a world-famous architect and aims to be home to 50,000 people by the year 2030 before going on to grow to a population of 5 million. So, how will an entire sustainable city be built in the middle of the desert? What exactly is equitism? And why is a billionaire, of all people, proposing the city of the future?
So there you have it, the Tolosa, a 400 billion 15-minute smart city spanning 150,000 acres. And so construction on this project is projected to start in 2030. However, in reality, we now have a good idea of why Kerry Lake could not win in Arizona. So yeah, Arizona has actually been on the Google Smart City test list for quite a while. They have big plans for that state, technocratic plans. The list of cities that will be partaking in this dystopia include Austin, Boston, Chicago, Houston, LA, Miami, New Orleans, New York City, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Portland, San Francisco, and Seattle. Now, do you notice any common threads here? Every single one of those cities is currently destroying themselves with terrible and authoritarian policy. And of course, also a coincidence that George Soros and his DAs are also running amok there as well. Now, there is a part of me that believes they're letting violent criminals go free while targeting the law-abiding citizens, destroying small businesses. Look, it's no surprise. I think these cities are intentionally destroying themselves so that their citizens clamor for order, which of course is going to come in the form of smart city surveillance. That's when they're going to come out with their full plan, technocratic control. Make their lives unlivable, and then offer to fix the problem, create the problem, exploit the problem, and offer the solution. But the solution was always their intended end point. Now, you might have noticed a lot of propaganda articles trying to come out and demonize those who see smart cities, the 15-minute city concept, for what they are. As usual, their counter is always the same. It's about making life more convenient for you. That's it. Don't worry about it. We are just moving essential things closer to you to make your life better. However, they always seem to leave out the constant surveillance and prosecution of those who do not comply. You know the part they always ignore. The World Economic Forum is driving the 15-minute city concept, and that they are actually working with governments to institute fines and jail time if you violate any of the restrictions. Freedom of movement is a fundamental right. Without it, you are a prisoner. Anyway, you really want to see what this is going to be like? I have a few clips to examine with you before we finish up. And I know, I'm sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice. Anyway, it's going to end up like this, as China is the blueprint. Dystopian. So, welcome to Skynet. Yes, they really do call it that.
The government can collect about its 1.4 billion citizens. Everyone over the age of 16 is required to have an official state-issued ID card that the government now wants to use to centralize all that information. And China is investing heavily in tech companies to help transform that government data into a virtually omniscient surveillance network. One of those companies is Megvii. It recently received a capital investment of nearly $500 million, part of which is from a state-run VC fund. But the name chosen for its premier piece of technology is a bit of a tell. Skynet, what is that?
The Terminator is the favorite film of our founder. So they use the same name, but they want to put something good into this system.
So, okay, in the Terminator, Skynet is evil, rains down death from the sky. But in China, Skynet is good.
Yeah, that's the difference.
So how do you think your facial recognition technology will change China?
Everything happened in the public can be record. We can know exactly what happened in every second, in every corner of the city. This is a video stream in a subway station by our smart camera. So we can capture every face in real time. Still like some criminal person is out there. There is the red box. So there is a warning to the police station that there is a criminal person. So I need to locate them.
So when it looks out onto a crowd, it's tracking all these faces and it's cross-checking those faces against what?
Criminal database.
And how many fugitives have been apprehended through this system?
Over 3,000 cases in nationwide. Yeah. Just one year.
In 1 year?
Yeah, 1 year.
Wow. So what you're working on now already seems like sci-fi. What do you think the future will look like in like 5 years?
Have you seen a film just like a Black Mirror? You just stand there and your face there is a point. So maybe that is the future.
But that's like a horror show.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that is maybe the kind of the future. Every people have their social points, I think.
If you like spit gum on the sidewalk, it would
yeah, your points, baby.
Anyway, check out this clip.
Picture your life in a place where everything you do, what you buy, how you behave, is tracked. The government gives you a score, and the score is a measure of how trustworthy you are as a citizen and determines what you're allowed to do, like ever. Boarding a train, getting a mortgage, all goes back to this score. It's called social credit. It's actually happening in China. The system's eyes are in big data, artificial intelligence, and roughly 200 million surveillance cameras. She's a 752. That's her rating with Sesame credit. You start with 1,000 points, and you can print out your report anytime. You lose points for things like jaywalking, littering, tossing cigarette butts, or spreading rumors. Cameras do a lot of the surveillance work, but it's pretty analog too, like posters that list the ways you can gain or lose points. And each night, local TV shows the surveillance highlights of the day. She's an information collector, a paid enforcer who walks around and writes down deeds about her neighbors. Like the man who carried a drunk person home. Things like this are good deeds, she said. But the farmer overheard swearing and being rude? Yeah, bad deeds. Her quota is 10 a month. She likes the work, thinks the city's...
Let's take a peek inside a smart city command center. You will have zero privacy, and it's all about the data. This is a snapshot on how smart cities and 15-minute city surveillance will work. This is going to be the backbone of every 15-minute city, smart city, or C40 city. Welcome to the future, where your every movement will be tracked within a 15-minute radius. Yes, in this age of AI, where people can be chipped and monitored, free will is over. Your privacy, opinions, choices, and decisions will be all controlled. Yes, they are trying to tell you that you don't need free will, and you will still be happy. And yes, I doubt that. In this clip, you can see social credit scores being checked on a train.
Dear passengers, people who travel without tickets or behave disorderly or smoke in public areas will be punished according to regulations, and the behavior will be recorded in the individual credit information system. To avoid any negative record of personal credit, please follow the relevant regulations and help with the orders on the train and at the station.
And now don't forget, this is a global plan. The list of cities includes every single nation. For example, Australia and Canada have already begun. I mean, really, it's all about creating a two-tiered society, and their plans, contrary to everything they say, in reality, is not about changing the economy to ensure it's more quote-unquote equitable. In reality, it's only going to exacerbate the wealth gap. You are going to have the rich, quote-unquote elite class living something like this. But then, the majority will be living like this. Yes, once again, welcome to the future. Living in the pod, hooked up to biometric sensors 24/7, constantly surveilled and critiqued, with points being deducted from your social credit score. Live in the pod, eat the bugs, you peasants. They always pitch it as some kind of utopia, but it's nothing more than dystopia. Now to end this video, I found something really interesting. The parallel between Mao Zedong's genocidal campaign, the Great Leap Forward, and the Great Reset.
The People's Commune will be the bridge that will carry China towards the socialist paradise. The Commune experimented with a completely new way of life. All private property was abolished. Houses, animals, land, and production tools became collective property. Nurseries and free, compulsory schools liberated women from their maternal duties so they could work in the fields. The family unit disappeared, and children were made to live by the new rules of collective life. The individual was nothing more than a cog in a big machine.
The furniture was seized for firewood, and everything that could be destroyed was destroyed. The pigs, the sheep, everything was collectivized. Even the pots and pans were seized because families weren't allowed to cook.
The aim was to force the peasants to take their meals in the commune's collective canteens. In some of them, they even abolished money. A system of work points was established. Food was distributed according to merit, i.e., each person's capacity to fulfill the production objectives. The notion of wages disappeared.
It was compulsory to turn up every day. If your name wasn't on the attendance list, you were punished and you lost work points. The fewer work points you earned, the less food they gave you. Oh, it was miserable. I can tell you that life was brutal for everyone at that time, except the cadres. Those people lived well.
From 1958 onwards, the cities are quite literally protected from the countryside. People are not allowed to just move about freely. A farmer who brings a cow to the market will need to travel with a permit from his local cadre. People who try to flee the countryside are sent back.
No, it's not about your convenience, it's not to make your life better, it's about controlling you, controlling the economy, and ensuring compliance. You see, to them, you are nothing more than a number, a QR code, and that is entirely antithetical to what life is supposed to be. Anyway, until next time, once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.